Check one. There we go. Oh, good evening, everybody. Sorry about the little bit of late start there. As you can see, we're trying to we're playing Boys' Own Adventures down here, although it's not really meant to be a sexist or a gender-based thing, but we tend to have lots of bits and pieces here that we're trying to get our head around. And that's only been partly successful for tonight, but we'll keep working on it so that we can get the message out there to people. Welcome to the Newcastle Institute. For those people who are here for the first time, it's an organisation that's been going since 2004, so nearly 20 years. I've only been involved for about the last decade or so, but the object has been to basically increase the quality of just public discussion and discourse about issues that form public policy. We don't tend to take a position on anything, so the aim of a night like tonight is not to get to the end and move motions about what action there should occur or who should do what or whatever, but it's really to basically just get some feedback, to get some input, so that when the community discussions take place out there in the community, people are able to say, well, look, I heard this at such and such, and that's something that we could take into account. Before we go further, I'd like to introduce our panel. So closest to me on your left is Sophie McCarthy. Sophie's a clarinetist, along with, I'm probably sure, a bundle of other instruments and things, because musicians tend to be a little bit that way. But Sophie's an architecture student and also, as I said, plays in orchestras and things like that, and she can probably say a bit more about that as we go through. In the centre, Charissa is Ferguson, sorry. I was about to put a Mick on the front of it, but I've been in the wrong spot. Charissa Ferguson. Carissa's at not far from here at all, actually, just across at Merewether High School as a music teacher. And I'd have to say, Charissa, we did a briefing session last night, and I saw Charissa sort of come up, and she was obviously walking through the corridors and then out into the car park, and I'm not sure how long she was out there. She probably couldn't put her phone down to access the keys to get in the car or something. But it made me really stop and think, you know, teachers in the last few years with COVID and having to pivot to this and to that and online and offline and get stuff that people who can't access it online can, be ready to not only do this sort of thing at a moment's notice, but make it work and make learning outcomes still happen. So I really think that's a pretty fabulous effort. And Charissa, on behalf of me, thank you. But it also, I guess days like today, having to lug stuff in and try and get things set up, made me realise again just how much teachers do to get those bits and pieces going that actually help kids be the best they possibly can. I used to watch, kindergarten assemblies and that sort of thing, and a teacher would walk out with a little cassette player and put it on the table and hit play, and nobody could hear it. And I always used to think, gee, you know, we're the adults. The stuff we can do to make the kids look good are what we ought to be doing, and that's the things that teachers do all the time. So thanks for that, Charissa, and we're looking forward to hearing from you. Dan Beazley's up the end. Dan is from Newcastle Live, which if you've done ever done a Google search for what's happening in music in Newcastle or live music in Newcastle, Newcastle Live will generally be one of the first things that comes up. It won't be the only return on that, but Dan can probably tell us lots of stuff about what is happening in the live space in Newcastle, what's happening across digital platforms, across social media and all of those sorts of things. So our aim tonight is to look at what's happening with music in Newcastle, what are its strengths, what are its weaknesses, what are the opportunities that we have, and what are the threats to it. But before we move on to that, I just wanted to acknowledge the fact that right here where we are at the moment, and as far as you can see, if you went outside and turned around and looked back up and across the river, we're on the land of the Awabakal and Worimi people. And it's been Aboriginal land back as far as anybody can remember, back as far as oral history goes. It could be 40,000 years, 60,000 years, but it was the land of those people, and they have such a rich history and heritage. I acknowledge elders past and present, and I know that all of us are greatly concerned about how do we actually nurture and grow the elders who are emerging into the future. How do we make that the most positive journey possible? And when you think about it, Aboriginal society also had a link to music. The archaeological reports probably suppose that from what they can work out in Arnhem Land, for example, that possibly about 1,000 years ago the didgeridoo started to emerge. I've often wondered, you know, what happened the first time that somebody picked up a bit of stick that didn't have anything inside it and made a noise down it. Just imagine everybody else coming around and laughing uproariously at this person making a silly noise into a bit of stick, and that growing from there into something that became symbolic as a man's thing within ceremony and tradition, and that was then passed down, and even these days represents so much about what we value about some of Aboriginal culture, that and rhythm and so on. So the basics of music in terms of step and rhythm and tempo and all of those sorts of things have been there as part of cultures all around the world for an inordinately long time, including us. Now, you don't have to look at the colour of my hair to work out that I'm a baby boomer. I'm one of that group of people who were born in between 1946 and 1964. The impact of the contraceptive pill and a few other things meant that the baby boom started to disappear around about 1964. In 1964, though, was also the year that the baby boomers' anthem, if you like, was written and recorded by Bob Dylan and became a #1 hit right around the world. Back in 1964, you see, the times were changing. And despite Ross's chagrin, about music in Newcastle, it's not just people who do that full time in recording studios or whatever. But you probably have people who play music. I can see someone in the audience down here who went to Italy to study opera at a very young age. I'm sure there are other people in the audience who do all sorts of things so far as having knowledge of music, even just tapping your foot to the music that's on in the background. And here was that particular hit. Grown and accepted that soon you'll be drenched to the bone. If your time to you is worth saving, then you'd better start swimming or you'll sink like a stone, for the times they are a-changing. Come mothers and fathers throughout the land, and don't criticize what you can't understand, for your sons and your daughters are beyond your command. The old world is rapidly aging. Please get out of the new one if you can't lend a hand, for the times they are a-changing. And part of my reason for singing this song is that we've got an election coming up in a week or so's time. And while we pride ourselves on not taking a position, and the people in this particular verse of this particular song relate to the American Congress, I think it's still relevant. Come senators, congressmen, please heed the call. Don't stand in the doorway, don't block out the hall, for he who gets hurt will be he who has fallen. There's a battle outside and it's raging. It'll soon shake your windows, it'll rattle your walls, for the times they are a-changing. And there's a couple of other verses, but that'll do us for the time being.
All right, you win.
Put that on again and I'll sit down here because I don't need to be standing up. I guess the other aspect of that song is that when I was talking to teachers, Charissa, a few years back, I would talk about the fact that teachers of my age, who were baby boomers, had made so many promises about change, things about generational conflict and failure to communicate. And arguably, I would say that 60 years later, nothing has necessarily changed. There are still issues that we still have to confront. And I suppose all I'm indicating is a way that music can also act, as well as a piece of culture, can also act as a social commentary point of view and right from that time onward and right through even to the music of today. If you listen to some hip-hop and things like that out of the US or wherever, lots of songs make commentary on the things of the day and always have done. So I'd like then to think about what's happening here in Newcastle. I've done my little bit of grandstanding over there. And I'd like to start off with, if we could, would you like to start, Charissa? It looks like, you look very ready to start there.
Perhaps, just on what you were saying, I teach a unit to my Year 9 students on protest music, and so we literally look at how music can help to sell a story or give you a voice, or at least even just get all of your emotions out, and to do that to 14 and 15-year-olds is such a powerful thing for them to go, oh, I might start to feel like I need to protest against something, or I might start to feel like I'm breaking away from my parents' views as, you know, part of being a teenager, and to find that there's music that this music can echo my feelings is a really powerful thing. So it's a wonderful thing to encourage in the kids.
And I think now so many more avenues for kids to actually be part of the creative process too, of creating music in a whole bundle of different ways. We have some young guys who've moved in next door to us, and they've been creating music too. They must obviously have got the rhythm tracks down in their recording, for they've spent a few weeks doing that, and sounds as though they've moved into the more melodic bit. So we're hearing a bit of guitar melody and vocal from time to time, and I'd have to say it's more pleasant. Look, so far as music goes in Newcastle at the moment, if we start thinking about what are the strengths of it, maybe if we start with you up the end, Dan, is that okay?
Yeah,
and
that's fine.
You could perhaps give us a little bit of a thumbnail sketch of how you see things at the moment.
I think one of the things that you touched on early was community around music, and I think that's probably our strongest asset locally in our music, is our music community. I think that we often talk about music industry, and I think the community around music is just as important as the industry around music, and is often overlooked at how important it is. And I think the reason why I like the term music community rather than music industry is because it encompasses the people who enjoy music as much as it encompasses the people who make the music. And while you're a guitarist and you've just sung us a song, I'm sure you've enjoyed playing at home, there is nothing like the joy of sharing that with other people who enjoy listening to it. And it's the reason why one of the highest compliments that you can give a performance is that you felt like you were a part of it. You know, it's one of the highest compliments that you can give to a performer. I felt like I was part of your show. And I think that that's probably, if I could sum it up, I know I've probably gone further than what I wanted to, but the music community is what I think our strength is here. And it's the reason why I think no matter what industry, the music industry or other industry or government or regulation throws at the arts always find a space to prosper.
Terrific. Would you like to carry on?
So if Dan has spoken about community, I think this wonderful idea of joining in with other people and creating something that is greater than the sum of the parts is greater than the individual. I really see that as a music teacher, teaching kids how to find their people musically, which can lend itself to finding people socially. In 2015, I joined a Ukestra, one of the fantastic Ukestras that exist in Newcastle, and I found for the first time that idea of just getting in there and just playing. It doesn't matter what you're doing, you're making a connection that doesn't even need words, that music is this wonderful universal language. There was a fantastic post that went around on Facebook last week that was shared in a lot of my music teaching communities about students not giving up on learning their instrument. Learning, that students might pick up an instrument and be talented to a certain degree, but then they get to the stage where they just run out of talent and it requires hard work. And quite often we see with students that that's when they give up, because they have to work on something. But if they've got that person in their life or that teacher or that parent who says, no, keep at it, just keep at it, the students then learn the value of hard work. They learn the value of that they're capable of something, that they belong somewhere, and that discipline of putting in time is certainly such a skill that can help them professionally, even more than just being a creative professional. That idea of hard work and continuing something. So, I love, from my perspective as a teacher, the discipline that can be instilled in learning an instrument, and then certainly sharing that passion with other people. I had another point about the strength of music in its shared humanity. I don't know whether you've seen any of the horrendous footage coming out of Ukraine. Small clips of, there was a little girl, a 7-year-old girl that sang in a bomb shelter, "Let It Go." And she sang it in Ukrainian. And that particular clip went viral, as well as other viral clips of violinists playing in bomb shelters, and this shared humanity of music that we have, again, universal language, that you feel that, they're not just refugees, they're not just people running away from their houses, they're musicians, or they know the songs that we know, and just that music can unite us all more than images of people on television or stories or people standing up and speaking in front of a crowd. That instant connection that you have with music is really quite powerful. So it's a fabulous strength that we can really draw on to, make this city great. Just that we can make Newcastle a great place. Thank you.
Yeah, I think something that Charissa touched on, which was actually really wonderful, is... I think something that Charissa touched on that was actually really wonderful was that music is so powerful. It can be a catalyst for political statements. It can be a kind of clarion call for people to kind of get up off their feet, like Charissa was mentioning with her protest unit with her Year 9 students. And I think it's a really unique art form to actually speak to people and clearly communicate ideas from a really young age that everybody can understand. And I think for me personally, as a student of music growing up, I think for me it really helped form a major part of my identity. For me, it actually really grounded me as an individual, because I felt like I was a part of something larger than myself. I felt like I was part of something important. And that actually instilled a great deal of confidence in me growing up, because I wasn't a particularly confident kid growing up, but my capacity to be able to kind of express myself through music, and I was a classically trained musician, I think for me was really, really powerful, and I made so many fantastic social connections from a really, really young age that I am going to carry with me for the rest of my life. And I think it was really special for me to be able to be a part of something like that. And I'm quite involved in a lot of art sort of things, but nothing compares to kind of my experiences with music. And I think the music community in Newcastle in particular is really, really unique and strong because of its diversity. No matter what kind of facet of music that you're interested in Newcastle, there's a place for you here. And I think that's a particularly powerful thing, and it's really special to Newcastle because, if you're into choir, there's plenty of opportunities for you to kind of explode your talent, really. If you're into classical music, like I was, there's loads of opportunity for you to be able to express yourself, marching band, all that kind of stuff. Singers, songwriters, everything like that. There's a place for you here in Newcastle, and I think that's really something exciting to look at. Particularly when music is such a vast environment. It has so many different sort of facets to it. Yeah.
That's just a few personal viewpoints, obviously, and I would certainly support that. I grew up in the country in a place called Wongo Creek, and in 1964, the same year that The Times Are Changing was a worldwide hit, was the year that school closed down. The little school that I went to, which was called Grantway, had 12 kids at it. In 1964, my sister and 2 other girls left to go to high school, and the school was going to only be 9 kids. So they closed it down, and I got the bus for the rest of the time. And I suppose that was also when the times were changing, was also the time that I was starting to move away from the country, as lots of country kids do. But for some country kids, a couple of weeks ago, I don't know whether anyone here went to see the 50th anniversary concert of the recording of Harvest, the Neil Young album. That was a pretty iconic album. And the drummer out of the band that was on stage is a guy called Cram, which doesn't take much to work out his mark backwards. But he grew up in a little town called Finley down in the Riverina. And he said that the impact that a music teacher coming to his school who believed in him and his ability and pushed him was the thing that made him and gave him the opportunity that he did to move from that environment and to go on to do the sorts of things that he's done. So music can also do that. It can also provide the opportunities for people who may not otherwise have had that. A number of years ago, a group went out to Wilcannia and did a hip-hop program with a number of the Aboriginal kids there about swimming in the river, obviously talked to them about all of the sorts of things that they liked and wanted to be doing. But it's that avenue, as you say, that provides, you can start off with a fairly humble sort of musical instrument and grow that into something that becomes quite a passion and feeds off that. So, yeah.
Those kids ended up playing at the Big Day Out, didn't they? That was a huge project that just changed their lives.
Yeah. Yeah, the band was called Spiderbait, and yes, it's certainly one of Finley's biggest exports, I believe, at the moment. So can we get some probably finite examples of things that are strengths within Newcastle music? You mentioned, I got interviewed on 2NUR-FM the other day, and I said, well, you think of Tamworth, you think of country music, think of Parkes, you think of the Elvis Festival, Port Fairy has a folk festival, Canberra has the National Folk Festival, all of that sort of thing. But here in Newcastle, we have a whole range of things right across the spectrum. So perhaps some examples of that. Do we want to start up that end again, Dan?
Oh, look, I don't think you can talk about Newcastle without saying Newcastle is a rock town, and there's a reason for that, is there's some great rock bands that have come from Newcastle. There's no doubt. But I think to understand Newcastle music just from the rock genre is probably, I think you're missing out. I love rock music. The bands I played in played rock music. I listened to rock music, but I listened to a lot of other music as well. And you mentioned the Ukestra. I started by saying that I think the biggest strength in Newcastle is music community. It's an extremely strong music community, and through my involvement with them, I've been lucky enough to have, seen artists play that I never would have discovered without that community. We're talking about this, what is Newcastle, what is Newcastle music is probably a whole other panel that we could, talk hours and hours about what it is. But from my experience, the strength that the Newcastle community and the industry, and I should say, when I say that I prefer the term community, I'm not discounting the sum of the parts, the work that hoteliers, venue owners, bar staff, chefs, waitresses, waiters, anyone who works around that. People want to be a part of it in all sorts of ways. Agents, venue bookers. I see that as the music community, and I really think that one of the strengths that we have, and I think where we see venues succeed, I'm going to touch on a weakness to talk about a strength. I think there's a lot of music lovers in Newcastle. People are passionate and they love music. And I think that when I see venues, licensed and unlicensed, do well, is when someone is in charge of booking entertainment that actually cares about music and entertainment. And I think there's lots of that here. It's not everywhere, it's not every venue, unfortunately, but I think it's, travelling around the country, I think we're losing venue owners who intrinsically care about music and entertainment, and I see venues that both, as I said, unlicensed and licensed, that succeed in Newcastle. The person booking that entertainment cares about it a lot, and I think that we care. Even people I've met in the music community that I disagree with, they still care. They care passionately, and that's a strength.
I think it's interesting asking what the motivations are to put on music, to have a music venue, or to put on a festival, or to have a concert. And there are so many operators and organisers who want to put on music. I'm thinking of music festivals that might run at a loss or might just break even, because it's to benefit the people. It's to benefit the performers who have that thrill of coming together and making beautiful music, or just to educate audiences or to lighten somebody's day. It takes a lot to take a financial risk to put something on and to invest so much time in putting on a concert, or without a guarantee of making a profit. But there are so many people who are willing to give up their time and invest and to put on things just for the heart of it. So that's sort of the other side of music that we're finding.
I completely, sorry. I completely agree, and I think there is a perception with people who may not necessarily partake in the music community that people, promoters that put on shows are somehow rolling around in big piles of dough. No one gets into promoting music for money, because if they did, they'd soon get out of it. People do it because they love it. There is money to be made, of course, but it's not big piles of money that you swim around in your swimming pool of money, and most of the time you lose. You win sometimes, and that makes up for all the times you lose. But they keep doing it because they love it, and that's a strength in our community, and the reason why we have the Fringe Festival, the Autumn Alive Festival, I can't think off the top of my head, but all these great things that happen in our city and our region is because people actually care. They're not doing it for the money, because if they were, they'd get into real estate.
You're lucky if you can win a job, certainly win a job in an orchestra, win a job as a professional muso that only makes music. I did a music degree, and 10% of my cohort are actually still making money as professional musos. And it's a cultural thing. Certainly Frankfurt in Germany is the same size as Newcastle. It has 4 professional orchestras. It's a different culture, but certainly we have a different community that the money side of making music is certainly a whole lot different. But yes, it just comes down to the heart of what we're doing. I'll pass on.
Yeah, I think Dan and Charissa actually bring up a really interesting point about the motivation for actually making music in the first place. And I think it's really interesting when you were talking about kind of finite strengths of music, you were talking about festivals and all that sort of thing, which I think is, very relevant. But I think from my perspective, I think the kind of finite strengths of music in Newcastle actually comes from the ensembles and actually comes from the people who make music themselves. It's not about the business of music to me. It's about the strengths, the finite strengths, are individuals really, or ensembles that kind of come together collectively to create music for the greater good. And that's not just, people who play an instrument or sing or something like that. It's listeners, it's people who, kind of support local artists and support local music and all that sort of thing. It's not so much about a festival that, is a 3-day affair and is a finite sort of period of time that, can kind of staple some kind of musical relevance. I think it actually comes from ensembles that, historically have relevance, like Dan was mentioning. Newcastle does actually have quite a history of successful rock bands, but I think it's almost on an individual level, the finite strengths of Newcastle music. It comes from ensembles and organisations of people who come together, who are all like-minded,
willing to give up their time,
are willing to give up their time
Absolutely.
and invest in something that is really worthwhile as an art form.
Well, there's the old saying, and I know, you both play instruments. I perform for free. I'm getting paid for all the time that the years and years that I wasn't very good, that I had to keep practicing, because learning is fun, and the playing at the end is fun. The practicing is the really hard work. You don't get paid for that. I play for free. I get paid to lug my gear to the show, you know. I just wanted to add that because I completely agree.
I think the notion of community building is a really good one to hang on to. And Newcastle has always had a really good range of those sorts of things happening. But just one that's coming up in the future, I saw a post only today that on the June long weekend in Carrington, a couple of people have decided that, you know, let's keep building the community of Carrington and have a full day music event that starts off at one of the local restaurants, goes to one of the pubs and goes then to another of the pubs. And musos have been lined up to fill those time slots so that you can basically move from one to another. Last year I got involved in a worldwide music event called Play Music on the Porch, which people right around the world registered for it, and then on this particular day, the last Saturday in August, went out to their front porch and played music. Obviously COVID sort of put paid to a little bit of that, but we'll be looking toward that as a community building exercise later this year to try and piece it together and timetable it so that people can, you know, potentially go out and walk around and hear different things happening, and then people feel as though they're part of that community building as well. You mentioned lots of the ensembles. I've seen Kim down here, who's had a huge length of time association with the Hunter Singers, and, you know, groups like that build not only local reputations but actually then take Newcastle from music over to the rest of the world and to lots of places, providing a vehicle, I suppose, for kids to have experiences beyond the music itself and to be able to sort of plug into what's happening in different places. One of the greatest, most fun times I had was actually sitting down with a couple of guys in a pub in Seattle, and because we both played guitars, we could just quickly work out a few things to do and have a bit of fun with it, and that was a lovely thing to do. It's interesting taking traditional cultural aspects and making them a little bit Newcastle as well. I think the Tap Dogs always struck me as a group that looked at what was a traditional dance style, if you like, and then looked at how they could make that Steel City. And with the toe cap boots, the steel cap boots, some of the early Starstrucks used to incorporate those sorts of elements in it as well, so that you sort of built this sense of how do we express where we live in the music that we make. And I suppose that's been part of, you know, Motown, all of those sorts of musical genres as well, that we see elsewhere. Music if you have a look at some of the statistics that you can dig up online, Nashville, the music industry there, contributes an enormous amount, you know, billions and billions of dollars, and right around the world the same thing happens. It's not just something that is eking away at money and things. But I guess, Dan, I was interested too, one of the weaknesses, I suppose, that's happened for music has been obviously COVID. Music as a performance art depends on someone doing the performance and audience.
Yep.
And I guess once you separate those two and make it impossible for them to actually do that, you've got to come up with other ideas. I'm wondering, are there some examples of that we can share with people?
Oh, we're definitely a resilient bunch, the music and arts community. But yeah, it was a massive hit. You know, I think we're talking, I probably was talking perceptions. I'll say we were talking perceptions. You know, the music and arts industry is actually a huge part of the Australian economy, and I think it's often discounted how small it actually is. It's not. It's huge. You know, I won't mention the other industries that it, you know, dwarfs, because I don't want to get into, you know, industry-based argument. But if we look at the funding that one industry would get over the other, you know, I think we miss out, especially when you consider how much it's worth to our economy. But thank you. I'll move on from that point. I'm a little bit cranky about that one. Yeah, COVID was tough. A lot of the talk about, you know, we met briefly last night, and a line was mentioned that, you know, it's never been easier to get your music out there, but it's never been harder to make money from that music. There's a lot of negative commentary about the streaming age. I would argue that the people making money from the small amount of people making money from streaming enough money from streaming to make some form of a living is probably not too dissimilar to when there was huge gatekeepers to the distribution and release of music. Ultimately, streaming was an invention to curb piracy, if we look at it, and it achieved that. And one of the things we do as humans is we take inventions and we use them how we want to. And one of the things that we were able to do is, I talked about one of the highest compliments that you can give to an artist is that you feel part of their performance. As an audience member, I felt part of what you were doing on stage. Music lovers want to be a part of it. So when you give them the tools to curate and be a part of the dissemination of music, they're going to take the bull by the horns and they're going to take part in that. But that leads us to the point where there's no money to be made in putting out if you're streaming it for free, where's the money coming from? It's a really good point. I
Can I
think...
just interrupt for a second?
Yeah.
People, what we're talking about is doing what we're doing at the moment, actually just streaming our performance, if you like.
Spotify, Apple Music.
Yeah, but also out via the internet as a live stream, so that people can then watch what you're doing, and people have all sorts of little ways of getting people to tip them online and that sort of thing, to try and monetize it.
Very few.
And to try and get the...
Very few, though.
Yeah.
There are still country music fans buy CDs and they buy a lot of merch. It's a good industry to be in, country music. Same with heavy metal. Heavy metal fans want to buy the CD. A lot of people who care about the artist that they love still want to buy the physical product. The boom in vinyl record sales dwarfed CD sales, I don't know, last year or the year before for the very first time in ages. And there's record stores popping up all around the city. And it's become a real hobby for people to collect records now, which is great for artists. And a shout out to Mitch from Hiss and Crackle Records, who, if you're an artist, you can take your music down to Mitch and he will put it on the shelf and he doesn't charge any commission, and that's a great thing to do for the industry, because it is hard to make money if you can't play. But ultimately, I think that in the digital age, in the age of streaming, there is lots of ways to get your music in front of people, and you can use that data to find out where you can play, and then you can play to them, and you can put tickets on sale, and you can sell them merch, and you can form communities. You don't need a record company to make money anymore. You can go and play a show. You might play to 10 fans the first time, and you sign them all up to your email, and you sign them all up to your social media, and the next time you come back to town, they've told 10 friends and say you're playing to 20 people. And the next time you come around, you're playing to 30 people. And I'm simplifying it, but you're getting the idea. So it's been tough, but there are tools out there, and bands are using them. We're seeing there's so many success stories in this city, not only for popular music, but also, people that have, are able to achieve in orchestras all around the world that come from Newcastle, the Hunter, Lake Macquarie, people who sing in opera houses all around the world. There's so many success stories here. So, you can do it, and it's possible when there's people around like we have in Newcastle that care. You can find your space and find the help you need. And that's why, I've got to give a shout out to teachers. I'm so happy that ARIA give a Teachers Award now, because it really is the cradle for greatness.
I think that we as teachers are responsible for creating audience members of the future. They're the ones that will seek out the music, not just as passive users, but ones that go, oh man, that's such a rockin' bass line, or look at that walking bass, or people that... Indeed, the understanding, and certainly audience members who seek a range of music experiences, not just commercial pop music, to go and be audience members in a whole lot of things. So we're talking about weaknesses. One of the big weaknesses that I have found in recent years with COVID as a teacher was that I still felt the need from my students, that the willingness to want to come together and continue their choir rehearsals, continue their band rehearsals. And so for 2 years, we have limped our way through online Zoom rehearsals. And a Zoom rehearsal, a Zoom band rehearsal, Zoom choir rehearsal, it's not really a rehearsal. It's you all have to have your computers muted, because if we all sang together at the same time, everything would just sound very chaotic. So you put your computer on mute and you sing along with the track. But the fact that you can still see everybody's face on the screen makes you feel like, oh, I still am part of my community. It's not the same, it doesn't feel the same, but it's close to it, and we're relying on that sort of emotional feeling of when I used to sing together or when I used to play my instrument together. This is still kind of it. And the fact that people were willing to turn up to Zoom rehearsals, sometimes weekly. Kim and I did an adult choir Song Sisters rehearsal every week. My children's choir, the Hunter Trebles, would turn up every week and sing along. I'd put the music up on the screen, I'd put the sound in the background, and I would see their little faces singing. It was tough, and we were worried that once the lockdowns lifted, that these kids who hadn't had the experience of performance, which for little extroverts, that's kind of why you do a lot of music. I want the spotlight. That haven't had that thrill of performance and have only had sitting here reading my notes. We were worried that they wouldn't come back to rehearsals, but the opposite has happened. We've had more kids come along to choir, more kids come and join the band, that I can't quite put my finger on the reason for, but whether it's just that need to feel part of a group. Post-COVID has been tough, but we've made it through.
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to COVID was, undeniably a very difficult time for everybody, not just musicians. And I think nothing was the same during COVID. We had to do Zoom rehearsals, Zoom lessons. I did 2 years of my degree online. Doing an architecture degree online is difficult, I can tell you that now. But we made it through as a global population. Like, everybody had to go through the same pandemic, everybody had to go through the same experiences. And I think with music in particular, yes, it was tough during COVID, but musicians understand that music is hard work. And there's a lot of practice that's inherent to music, and there's a lot of practice that's needed to make something beautiful. And I think a more diligent, hard-working group of people than musicians, I'm kind of yet to find, to be honest. They have such a love of their craft, particularly with teachers as well. I'm sitting next to Charissa. Chris was actually one of my conductors when I was in Hunter Wind Ensemble as a student.
I knew when she was this big.
Yeah, no, Chris has known me since I was 9, and I'm going to be 21 later this year. And yeah. That's pretty awesome. Yeah. And I think obviously COVID was very, very hard, but the teachers through music and the students through music are so passionate about the cause that they're willing to come together because it makes them feel happier, and I think through COVID we did actually need a bit of happiness,
It was interesting that Muso's Corner sold out of instruments during lockdown.
Yeah. Exactly, learn a new skill.
Equipment, all sorts of things.
Yeah.
Everybody wanted to pick up an instrument or re-find their instrument that they had lost. It was quite interesting how that changed it.
Yeah, so it's I think obviously COVID brought a lot of challenges, but it also, I try to think about things in a positive light most of the time. I think it brings a lot of unique opportunities, people who are perhaps too shy to kind of step out and give music a crack if they'd never tried it before, had some time where they could kind of like do it in their own space, away from people, and they could just kind of practice their own skill. And I think, if they worked on that skill, like musicians often have to do, once we come out of COVID, they're kind of like, okay, actually, I'd like to, give this a go and find a group, And I think we're seeing that across schools, because obviously students miss hanging out with their friends, they miss hanging out with like-minded people, and I think music is kind of the first sort of go-to place to find people who are also like you, particularly as a young person.
There's definitely something significant about finding your people in a music group. If you're not a sporty kid, if you're not, a cool kid, finding other music nerds is pretty powerful.
Yeah, if you're a band kid, it's pretty fun. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Lots of great examples there. It's sounding more and more to me, though, that Maslow probably had it fairly right with the hierarchy that once we get food and shelter and basic needs sorted out, that the next most important need is often for affiliation and that sense of belonging, and that one of the things that separates us can also be something that allows us to get together. Back in the very early, not the early days of the internet, because that was probably back in the 80s, but around the turn of the century, there was a project underway right around the world called the YouTube Orchestra, and it was such a fabulous example of the ability of people to watch the music performances that they needed to practice and things, and then all of the people were flown into New York to actually perform together. But the power of the internet as the connector for all of those sorts of things, I can see James down in the audience too, and I know that he was involved in lots of online musical collaboration at various times. But that ability to connect with people in different locations, but speaking the same language, it didn't matter whether you were speaking Spanish or French or Italian or Portuguese or whatever, that the language of the notes on the stave and the time signatures and all of that sort of stuff was enough to keep you going, and to have a language that you could actually deal with and interact with other people on. It must be interesting when you then work across cultures and different sorts of scales and music and so on. Let's move on to some of the... Oh, and before I do, look, if you've got questions in the audience, please put your hand up and we'll get a microphone to you so that we can do that as we go along, because we're attempting to make this as much of a discussion as possible. What are we looking at in terms of opportunities for music as we move on? And part of that, I think, also picks up on, Charissa mentioned the idea about teaching kids about audience. And it's something that people don't often think about, but sometimes you need to learn how to be an audience. You need to learn that if you're sitting in a pub and there's someone playing music in the corner, that at the end of the song, if you liked it, just give them a couple of claps, and it's interesting how quickly people catch on to the idea and they suddenly become an audience. And from the musician's perspective, you've then got that energy feeding back to feed your own performance, and it makes such an inordinate difference. And sometimes kids don't realise that if they just simply usually watch a screen, the screen can't see them. It can't get offended if they're picking their nose or whatever else. And that learning how to actually be an audience can be just a skill that can actually be, I don't suppose taught, but certainly suggested, and certainly suggested in a positive way. But we've talked about the fact that Newcastle has lots of variety in the sorts of music that's available. We've talked about some of the positive benefits in terms of affiliation and so forth, some of the issues around whatever. But what are some of the opportunities that we now have, assuming that perhaps we are not going to be constrained by COVID quite as much, looking toward the future? Let's be a little bit optimistic about some of that.
You go.
No, I was just actually going to pick up on what you were saying about being an audience. This idea of being absolutely present in an audience and not feeling the need to pick up your phone to play solitaire, to check out what's happening, or to get distracted. One of the biggest things that I can teach my students is how to be bored, and it's okay to be bored. This need to have constant stimulus is becoming more and more invasive. But one of the things that I like to teach my students about being an audience member is just sit there. You might get bored sometimes, but you might also find a real sense of peace about just doing one thing. Certainly pub audiences are different to classical music audiences, but that idea of being absolutely taken by the performance and just doing one thing is such an interesting thing. So we're talking about opportunities in Newcastle. We haven't quite touched on the idea of venues yet, and I have a feeling like that's going to come up. But I think there's some great opportunities to build some venues, to collect a whole range of different size theatres, venues, to suit such a range of audiences. There is a real limit, certainly I find as a as a teacher, I take the regional concert band, Sophie's old band. My wife takes the regional choir. We are looking for places to put on medium-sized events, and we can't do it because there's nowhere that will take a child-friendly audience. We can't hire out the auditorium here because it's associated with the pub, as much as it is a nice space. There are some wonderful things that are happening on the Central Coast in terms of medium-sized theatres that are opened by visionaries that can see the need to have spaces for audiences to come into. So I welcome the idea that in all of this change that we're seeing with venues closing down, new venues opening up, that perhaps there will be new things that will open up that will give all of our communities a space to perform, a space to have audiences, a space to come together and be part of that music.
Yeah, I mean, I think the question of venues is definitely a big one, particularly in the future. And I think in Newcastle, we're actually kind of in an interesting kind of place architecturally in that we're kind of rebuilding the face of the city. I mean, in the last few years, we've, built a new university campus. We kind of taken care of the education side of things, tertiary education. There's been modifications to schools around the place. There's been new infrastructure put in terms of like the light rail and all that sort of thing. And I think in the kind of sequence of, rebuilding Newcastle has been plastered around the city, arts will kind of hopefully be taken care of and be taken into consideration. And I think that would be, a really exciting thing because there are so many young musicians and bands and all that sort of thing around Newcastle that would take advantage of that. And I think, in the kind of transition of, rebuilding the city or, rebranding the face of Newcastle and all that sort of thing, I think there has to be consideration taken into how we can facilitate the arts and, what we need to do to actually take care of the arts because, not only is it important to the community and, the cultural well-being of Newcastle, but it's also important to the economy, as Dan mentioned earlier. The arts in Australia and around the world makes up a huge part of the economy, and it's super, super important, and it needs to be kind of front and centre at these sorts of discussions in terms of planning and infrastructure and all that kind of thing. So, yeah.
Thanks for
Yeah.
Before I talk about opportunities and touch on those points, I'm a digital evangelist. I think there's very few things that I can't find a digital solution for, but one of the things that I think is lost in the digital world, you were talking about being bored. People don't listen to albums in full anymore, like lie down and listen to track one and listen all the way through to the end of the album and like be changed by it. Music is often now like an accessory to something else that you're doing. I'll put that aside. We could probably talk on that for ages, but I think that's one of the things that the digital age has maybe lost. I think it's created new art forms that are just as exciting, but that process of listening to an album, I think, is maybe lost with a lot of people. Yes, I think...
Sorry, just on that point,
Mm-hmm.
has there also been a commensurate, not rise, but disappearance of the idea of a band or a musician making an album? A set of works that hang together across a general theme or that start in one place and go to another. Has that tended to change?
I think there's diversity. There's still artists and ensembles or bands out there that will always focus on making an album because they've been inspired by albums themselves. And even if it's rare that they haven't been inspired by albums, but say they haven't, there's some things that you want to say that can only be said over multiple songs or arrangements or movements, whatever you're creating. But yes, there is I know a lot of artists who are trying to quote unquote make it after creating singles, EPs that bring all those singles together. And often they're after trying to grab a certain sound or feel like there needs to be lyrics in the first 3 seconds of the song. There's a lot of... You can get online and pay stupid amounts of money for probably from many courses that say they will teach you how to write a song that will, make it on a streaming service like Spotify or Apple Music. That's not great for the art, but it's one of the things that's happening. But no, there's still people making albums. I mean, there's some amazing albums being made. My favourite album this year by an artist by the name of Carla Geneve is a piece of art from start to finish, and there are still people expressing that way and listening that way, but it's not popular anymore. I'm going to sort of take what you have both said and about the city moving forward, venues, and that arts will be taken care of in the reinvention of the city. We need agent of change laws. We need entertainment precincts, because then the current venues that we have will be protected and valued more as venues than as apartments or accommodation, because they're a part of an entertainment precinct. An agent of change law is, I'll really simplify it, but an agent of change law is that here's a venue, a public venue that is, for the last 100 years been the home to live music, and you build a new house next door and you complain that the music is too loud, you don't have a leg to stand on because you're the agent of change. And special entertainment precinct, you can find them in places like Fortitude Valley in Brisbane. And that's a reason why musos talk about Fortitude Valley being a hub for amazing music and creativity, is because they've cemented it. They've said that these streets here are entertainment streets. If you move in, have a great time, They're trialling it in a suburb in Sydney. Well, they trialled it last month in a suburb in Sydney, and in, of all places, Wangi in Lake Macquarie. Yeah. You can read about it all on newcastlelive.com.au. Thanks for the plug. Cheers. And they're basically going to take the data that they got out of that trial, and if successful and the data shows, then they will start rolling those special entertainment precincts out around New South Wales. And that will not only protect our current venues, because they'll be worth more as entertainment venues because they have that status than they are as apartments or, a new shopping centre, and it will encourage new development of venues.
Yeah, and I think it's also interesting to kind of ask the question, what could a venue be? It's kind of interesting to think about what you actually need to have a venue. Do you need to have, 4 walls and a roof and a stage and a backstage area and all that sort of thing? I think, it's kind of interesting to think about, the space that we have in Newcastle and all that sort of thing, and think about, well, what can we do with the space that we've got, and what do we need to actually make a venue? Is it about ambience? Is it about acoustic? Is it about storage or electrical supplies, something like that? I think it's I got a question. But I think it's interesting to think about what is a venue of the future, because obviously, throughout history, venues have had so many different definitions.
I think that's a really good question, I know when talking, the Newcastle Comedy Club is a new venue, and I know we're talking music here, but I know talking to comedians that, when they're put into a corner, in a corner of a pub somewhere, they're putting on a very different show than when they're presenting in a purpose-built club. I know from being in a band and talking to bands, if you turn up to a venue and they have a stage and a lighting rig and an in-house PA with an engineer, you're going to put on a better show than if you're worrying about your own PA, how it sounds out the front, the lighting, and getting everything set up. And that there's not many venues with that anymore, But I purpose-built, I think horses for courses is probably a bad analogy to say about it, though. Sorry.
No, that's great. Sorry, thanks. My question was a venue that is changing to a high-rise a high density venue is the Cambridge Hotel. Everyone would know about that coming up in the next year or two. Is there anything in council that has made it to remain to have that facility in that same location, or has that facility just been completely scrapped from that location? And is this what's going to continue to happen around Newcastle?
It's a good question. I know, I think it's beyond council level. I'm not going to get into politics because it's not my area of expertise, but I believe that I don't think the approval is via council as far as I understand it. I also understand, before I start, that Link City, the developer of the student accommodation, has reached out to the Newcastle Live Music Task Force, who are now backing a what do you call it? A petition. Thank you very much. I went blank. A petition started by Belle Taylor, an amazing supporter of live music in Newcastle, and calling on the developer to include the Cambridge Hotel in their development. Currently, the media that is coming out of Link City, their press releases all say that it doesn't fit with their vision of student accommodation to have a licensed venue within their student accommodation. We could argue that.
You would argue that would be...
yeah, that would have been heaven for me, but you can argue that. But I sort of go back to my original point. So it'd be interesting to see what comes out of those talks, because from what I understand from the NBN report, that Link City has reached out to the Newcastle Live Music Task Force. So it'll be interesting to see what comes of that. But what I will say, before I finish, is I firmly believe that if we had in place a special entertainment precinct, we could have avoided that, because the Cambridge would be worth more as a live music venue than it would be in a special entertainment precinct than it would be apartments or student accommodation. That's my belief.
I believe with the Cambridge site, the owner of the Cambridge currently is actually moving their venue.
That's one of the things that I've heard.
That they're actually moving their venue, so we're not necessarily losing a venue as such in Newcastle. It's just moving its place. It might not be the venue. I think that they're moving to might not be as large as the Cambridge. I don't have the exact square meterage off the top of my head, but I believe with I've actually seen a couple of the plans for the proposed Cambridge. They do have a restaurant and bar, I think. I'm not sure if it's actually music. Again, it's but it's I believe at this point in time, the people who own the Cambridge are going to move their venue to someplace else, and it is going to be a live music venue.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Where is our Fortitude Valley going to be in Newcastle then? Because we've got the Grand, and that will be the last live music venue in Newcastle after the Cambridge, like in the city. Yep, it's now Newcastle East, but it was Newcastle Central. Now it's Newcastle East. So Newcastle West has no live music other than the Wicko, and that's getting further and further out.
Yeah, I mean it's a town planning thing, isn't it? Yeah, but I think it kind of harks back to the question of what do you need to actually create a venue? You know, does it need to be a huge facility, or does it need to be like?
There's a theatre in, there's a question over here as well. There's a theatre on the Central Coast called the Red Tree Theatre that's a 200-seat venue that exists in an industrial, one of those prefab concrete sort of industrial car parks that it can be hired out for anyone who wants to hire out their venue, and it's an amazing venue. It's got breakout rooms, it's got a multifunction space. And the fact that it has popped up in an industrial area is quite extraordinary. So the Red Tree Theatre is worth looking at as a model. We had a question down here.
Hi, hello. My name's Kiara. I am currently a student of UON, a student of social science. I came along this evening because I am currently researching the industry shifts experienced by live music operators in wake of the latest governmental regulations spurred by COVID. So absolutely everything that's been touched on tonight has been really useful for me, most certainly. My question, I guess, first up, I have many, but my first one, I guess, would be how can we engage these sort of conversations with a younger demographic? Most of the people that I have included in my research, which have been mentioned in various different ways this evening, generally didn't really know that this was happening tonight, and their opinions would have been really useful in this forum. I guess, how can we do that? I know you're on social media and you're across that, but yeah, that's my question. How can we engage a younger community into these conversations?
I guess we'd love the answer to that question. Andrew down here's got his hand up and may have some of them, but
Or how can I help?
I suppose we've just been trying through all of those means that you suggest, but whether it's a cultural thing or whatever in terms of getting people to come along to something like this, I'm really not sure.
My feedback was, oh my God, would have loved to be involved, didn't know it was happening.
Yep.
Which is no discredit to anybody,
Yep.
but how can we solve that problem?
Yep.
This has been really useful for me. A lot of my question guiding around my collection of data is why do you choose to be a live music operator? How do you think that live music contributes to community strength? What are the biggest obstacles, and what are your hopes and goals? So this is all particularly relevant for me, and I thank you. If anyone is a live music venue operator and wants to connect or speak later, I would very much appreciate that.
As you say, I mean, getting the message out there, I put something on the Newcastle Muso network, for example, but I'm not sure whether that got much penetration or whatever, but we'll certainly be open to any ideas that you can think of or think of later and send through, because we would certainly like for those discussions to be relevant.
With an email.
Yeah. Just a quick message on the Cambridge. I think one of the things that we need to remember in the discussion is a lot of people, it's probably, I suppose it's an attachment to the building itself, but it's also the fact that it's a venue that's recognised throughout the industry as one that a touring band can come to and know that they've got a certain level of expectation around what the venue will contain and do for them. So if they're booking a string of tours from, say, Sydney, leaving Sydney, coming to Newcastle, heading up the coast, going to, say, the Great Northern at Byron, that is also a recognised industry venue, and then heading on to the Gold Coast or whatever, it's that sort of thing that provides an opportunity then for local bands here to hopefully get themselves on the bill as a support act or something, and to be able to play on the stage and interact backstage with some of those musos who are in a more experienced band. And it's part of that, if you like, the channeling effect of provision through that sense of rites of passage, I suppose, for young bands and things growing up as well. So
I want to talk to Chiara. Sorry, was it Chiara's question and point? But just to finish off that and to underline it as well, the real loss that the music community, music-loving community will feel with the closure of the Cambridge is not necessarily the word the Cambridge. What it will lose is that cap venue room, 800 people. That am I gone too loud? That the room at the Workers' Club, or Nex, is probably too large for some acts, and a 200 cap theatre would be too small for some acts. So if you've got an act that attracts around 800 people and you're looking for rooms of that, you're going to be hard-pressed to find one. I think one of the most exciting things happening is that Century Venues are developing the Vic Theatre, just outside the mall there. That's exciting. Watch that space. Because they do amazing things at the Enmore Theatre. So they will do it, no doubt they would do amazing things there. But I have heard, like you, that there are many options on the table for the Cambridge Hotel. To come to Chiara's point is, I think there would be some people from the younger music community that if had known would want to take part. But one of the strengths that I find from my experience with the younger music community is they're organising themselves. They don't need us. They don't need venues. They don't need record labels. They don't need the gatekeepers. They're doing it themselves. They're putting bands on in their backyards. They're starting their own record labels. They're printing their own shirts. It's so exciting. It's, you know, I personally think, and it's one of the things that people want me on panels like this for, that I haven't said tonight, is that Newcastle music is as healthy, if not healthier, than it ever has been. And I'm excited about it. And that's some of the reasons. Like, they don't need us, you know. They don't need the gatekeepers. They don't need the media. They can talk to just as many people. You know, YouTube channels have more subscribers than, you know, NBN gets views than people buy papers. Like, why would they go through the gatekeepers? So while I do agree, I think that, you know, more needs to be done to be inclusive and to try to get the word out about things like this. A lot of me thinks they kind of don't need it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting to kind of see, I don't know, maybe there's a kind of a generational difference between the way that, I don't know, maybe people my age kind of run their live music venues and all that sort of, their live music ventures. I mean, I think it kind of harks back to the reason why musicians do what they do, I think, in that, you know, they do it for the love of it, you know. And the thing is, I think we've all kind of touched on this. Musicians are a really hard-working bunch, and if they want to make something happen, they're going to do everything they can to make it happen. And I think, you know, that is reflective of, you know, the music community and, you know, kind of getting their name out there. You know, they're going to put concerts on in their backyards. Like, they're going to make their backyards into venues of some sort, you know, and they're going to do whatever they can to get their name out there. I think they even make the digital sphere as a kind of venue. I know it's not the same as, you know, a real life venue, but I mean, it is for them, you know, because they're getting their music out there. Because, you know, I mean, at the very essence of it, people are listening to their music, and if you have an audience, is that not a kind of venue? It's a community. Yeah, and I mean, I think it kind of just harks back to the reason of why musicians do what they do, if that's helpful at all.
Community is one of my biggest thematic words in all of my research, certainly. I guess the reason for my question around that is looking at my preliminary findings when I'm speaking to venue operators. Their biggest concern is that in regards to research and policymakers, the people who are making decisions on behalf of live music venues generally have minimal understanding of who's involved, how it all works. So that spurs in my motivation to try and play that role, to try and understand it a little bit more and deliver that information to people who can make decisions and do it in a more constructive way, I guess. And I'm noticing a lack of cohesion as well in all of my participants. I think a little bit more community collaboration would be very, very useful in a city our size, in a regional, you know, entity.
Yeah. Thanks for that. If anyone else has any questions too, don't
I've got a
hesitate
comment.
to. Oh, sorry. Sorry, James, just before I go, you go, could
Okay.
I meant to mention right at the outset, Marcus Wright, who is the owner of and publican at the Wickham Park Hotel, and is with Big Apachee, which is an agent booking service as well as an event promoter and those sorts of things. He was going to be here tonight as part of the panel. He contacted me earlier today and is sick and has just taken a test and is wondering whether or not that's going to be COVID or whatever. But so apologies from us, obviously, for having advertised someone who isn't here, but also from Marcus, who would have loved to have been here. James.
So I don't want to underestimate how diabolical losing the Cambridge is, and it is, because it's irreplaceable. There's no venue like that in Newcastle. This is a pretty good space. As I sit here, I go, this is pretty good. But one green shoot, though, or a number of the green shoots that I've seen, I've been in the music industry here since the late 80s, is the now emergence of the bowling club. And so, and it's maybe the single biggest change that I've seen to the Newcastle music industry since I've been here. You look at what they've done across the road here is amazing. They are at the forefront of it, but then you've got Mayfield, you've got Lambton, you've got Alder Park, you've got all of these bowling clubs, which have all got the facilities that we need to put on live music. They're maybe not as maybe custom made as you would hope, and often you're playing in front of screens of poker machines or dog races or something like that. But for want of a bit of effort, you could have 15 venues in Newcastle by the end of next month putting on gigs without very little effort at all.
Exactly, and this is yeah, I think that's a really good point to make. I mean, I think particularly with the community that we're talking about as well, musicians will be willing to take this initiative to kind of make this happen, I think. And this is what I mean about what do you need to actually make a venue. I mean, is it about building an entirely new space, or is it about maybe doing some kind of adaptive reuse project about existing spaces already? Because we do have a city, and there are spaces that are capable of holding bands and performances and all, like the space we're sitting in right now. I mean, I think this is a perfectly nice space, and I think there are plenty of spaces around Newcastle that kind of fulfill the same criteria. And I think, if we kind of almost kind of critically examine the spaces that are already existing in Newcastle, we can maybe find some solutions to how we can, solve venue issues, or, what we actually define as a venue in Newcastle. Maybe that can be something that we consider and kind of make special about Newcastle. That could be a kind of cultural thing,
Who says it has to be a nice space to be able to enjoy it? I mean, I've been to
That's the thing.
Oh, you go. No? Oh, yeah, I just wanted to say, yeah. I completely agree with what James is saying, and I think going back to the very first thing I said, I think it's the strength that we have is that we got people who really care, and you don't have I agree that musos can do it themselves, but music lovers can do it, and that's why I think that the venues that are flourishing with music and entertainment have people behind the scenes that absolutely love music, and I'd never had that insight, man, but it's totally true. Bolos are absolutely going off in Newcastle, and why not?
I would love to see a space that doesn't serve alcohol, though. For the kids, But yeah, certainly we've got a lot of potential here.
Sorry, look, I totally agree. I think the alcohol sales are about paying the bills a lot of the time. Yeah. Oh no. I think it's I think that's why public institutions are also so important. And I think there needs to be greater access, cheaper access to those public institutions without naming particular larger scale 2-story venues. Yeah. I think that's where it needs to step up, and they need to, if you're limiting the amount of people that you can have backstage, that's also very limiting to school groups and large ensembles. And I know that is currently the case in one of our public venues. So I think public venues need to come in there as well, because I think unlicensed venues are also important to our music community. Sorry, am I gone over time?
I was getting the wrap up in a second, but just before we move from that, and perhaps Sophie, you might be someone who could comment on this as an architecture student. Some of the obvious architecture in the centre of town that creates a bit of comment usually is the new space for the university, and the other space for creative industries, which has got the timber, laminate, and all of that sort of thing. In terms of the university moving into the middle of the city, what sort of impact has that had or seemed to have on things like the conservatorium and the whole idea, I guess, of creative industries? There's that word again, Dan, as to music being community, industry, or whatever, and how that fits with things like the uni and its brief, if you like.
Yeah, I mean, I think with the university kind of launching a campus in the middle of the city, I mean, it's going to bring a lot of young people into the middle of the city. And I think, I think a lot of the people who are currently in the creative industries school are interested in this sort of thing. And, and I think a lot of the degrees that are actually kind of facilitated in the new space building, like the law, business, social sciences, all that degree off the top of my head. I'm actually not at that campus, so if I've gotten that wrong, please correct me. But I mean, I think it's bringing a lot of young people into the city, and a lot of young people do actually like to come out and look at live music. But I think the way that the university kind of fits into the sort of community of Newcastle, particularly with the conservatorium. I mean, like, the conservatorium is a hugely important building in Newcastle, and I think it's
It was
Yeah.
when it was built. Oh, Kim has a question. It was one of the country's, or if not the country's, finest concert hall for chamber music. A stunning space, stunning natural acoustics, and some people have decided to put in huge speaker stacks and concert and tables to turn it into a lecture theatre. The changing of the Conservatorium Concert Hall into this rock venue has been heartbreaking to a lot of the Newcastle community. And that's it, Kim. Public venues.
Central Coast also has the Wyong Art House, which is a beautiful space. Now in Newcastle we've got the lovely Civic Theatre and the Playhouse, and they're great venues, but they're not good venues for live classical music or acoustic music. And I would really like to see us have much better access to venues that are suitable for that. The best one at the moment is the Cathedral, and it's not so good for audiences because you can't see anything and you get very uncomfortable after 30 minutes sitting on those church pews. City Hall is also very good but very expensive, and it's 800 seats, but it's a very expensive place to hire, and with most community groups just can't afford it.
Okay, so I'd like to probably draw it all together now, seeing as we're getting near the time that we're supposed to finish. What I'm hearing is that we have always had lots of good things happening in Newcastle. We have people meeting their need for affiliation and entertainment and so forth. We've got lots of passionate people involved in music. We've got some issues coming to the fore at the moment in terms of coexistence between spaces, and I think what I've heard tonight is certainly an empathy from people in all quarters to understand what's going on. And if we could probably come back on the positive note, I suppose, to that sense of community, that if all the discussions that happen like this, and I take your point entirely that it would be great to have these discussions more generally, it's about coexistence of ideas and people. It's what humanity can do very well. It's what, unfortunately, we seem to be doing fairly poorly at the moment. But I've heard tonight that we've got bundles of people who are really keen to keep that happening and to keep Newcastle a place that not only has plenty of different things on offer, but always has that little bit of edginess about it that sets it apart from some other places. I really thank Dan for his positivity and input. So could you please give... We didn't probably get a chance to talk as much to Charissa about the impact on students. We did talk a little bit about them being very happy to get back together and so forth at the end of COVID as a result of that. But I think there was a lot implicit within the idea of building both performance and audience, and building the worthwhile nature of music being part of a school program right from the very early stages right through, so that people not only just intuitively pick up on that tapping of the foot, but actually know a little bit about how to tap it in different paces and times and that sort of thing as well. And so there's a role there. And Sophie, I think as a architecture student, you've sort of put that little bit of balance in around about the spaces. You know, so often we hear about we're losing all our old buildings. You know, in Europe they treasure theirs and so on. But things can coexist. The new can sit alongside the old. New ideas can sit comfortably and intermingle with old ideas. And really, that gives us the opportunity to do that as well. So, could I ask you to thank the panel, please? And my panel operator down here, Andrew, and Ross running the microphones and things round. Thank you. And please have a great night, whatever you're doing. I believe the Chinese food's gooder than anywhere else. Oh, next month coming up, we're talking about teaching. And you will have probably heard about industrial action and all sorts of things. It's not just about wanting more money, it's really about recognising how roles and emphases change over time, and how you've just seen tonight a passionate teacher who's here doing this as well as all the other sort of stuff that she's got to do to keep a bundle of students on track for their learning outcomes. So next month we're talking to Professor Jenny Gore. Oh dear me, Jenny Gore. Who's a laureate professor, I should mention. Jenny was involved in some very significant research that drove a lot of practice around teacher education, and is still involved very heavily in that, with looking at what makes quality teaching and how do you actually look at some of the things that you build into those programs. And she's being joined by Professor Sandy Wong, who's from Macquarie University, who's looking at early childhood education. So we're looking at a fairly freewheeling discussion, not so much about what teachers do or whatever, but it's really around the role of teachers. How do we attract them? How do we retain them? How do we sort some of the issues out? How do we, I suppose, recognise and celebrate the good things that they do, as well as the things that people want to hark back to their own experience about. So thank you very much for being here. Keep an eye on our website, and certainly any other ideas you've got to engage different audiences, we'll certainly like to hear about them and do something with them. Thank you very much. Good night.